If you're anything like me, you suffer through winter just hoping and waiting for the first blossoms of spring. My goal in today's video is to showcase some of those early blossoms that take place in the month of April here in Northwest Arkansas. I have a video specific to native plants that are blooming in the early spring here in Northwest Arkansas that I can link down below as well. But my focus in today's video is perennials and shrubs and trees that are looking really nice this time of year. There's lots of things that are just starting to leaf out and just starting to break dormancy as we enter into spring here. But I wanted to make special note of things that look especially gorgeous and are in their prime and bloom this time of year. My goal as a gardener and with the landscaping around my house is to make sure that I have blooms from the first crack of spring all the way through till my first frost, which is sometime in October. I took a picture of my grandparents' azaleas when I was visiting them, and they've decided to remove most of their old hedging and shrubs and things in their front yard to replace with these same bright pink azaleas. If you get bad weather like hail or heavy wind or something like that, it can damage the blooms of azaleas, but if you have a mild spring, they really are gorgeous. Some of the improved varieties bloom both spring and fall, but even if they just bloom in the spring, they really offer a show when not many other shrubs or woody perennials are blooming. So these azaleas I thought were worth mentioning, even though I don't have them in my own garden, just because they're such a statement in the spring landscape. It's April 17th here in the garden, and I wanted to make note of this Boom Chocolata hardy geranium. It is the second year that I've had this. I planted it just last season, and it's already about 2 to 2.5 feet across and probably at least 18 inches tall so far, and the blooms are just lovely. They're starting to fade at this point. You can see some petals dangling in the wind, but it really was just such a nice addition to this space in the garden, and I really like the foliage, especially when it comes up. It leans more toward that purpley brown chocolate color, and then the leaves get lighter and more green as the season progresses. I took this clip of this pink dianthus when I was at my in-laws' house, and this is something that has really been a workhorse for them in their garden that gets a whole lot of direct sun in the afternoon. I love the way that it is kind of a blue-gray green in the inside with the leaves. It's such great contrast, and this is one that, as you can see, is right up against the concrete. This is stained concrete that gets really, really hot in the summertime, and like I said, it is full sun in the heat of the afternoon, and so this dianthus has really been a blessing to them in an area where they felt like there was nothing that would grow without getting crispy. This doesn't require a ton of water, and it has really held up nice. I believe that they have 3 dianthus on either side of their walkway here, and I just love the show that this dianthus gives in the spring for them. This Jack Frost Brunnera is one of 3 in my mom's shade garden. I love the way that the leaves are silvery and they contrast the other greens here in this garden space. I also love the wispy bright blue blooms that add extra interest in early spring and in the beginning of April. I planted this white columbine from bare root a couple of years ago and just kind of limped it along in a pot until I was finally able to get it in the ground last year, and it is looking so nice. I love the white blooms. It's probably almost 2.5 to 3 feet across and deep as well, and with the blooms I would say it's at least 2.5 feet tall, almost 3. It's looking really nice, and I'm really impressed with how the foliage mostly stayed green over the winter. As soon as the coldest part of our winter was over, this guy started coming out of the ground and the foliage looked really nice from the get-go. So I'm interested to see how it performs as it gets a little bit warmer this season, but we've already had days in the 85 range this spring, and it's still looking really, really nice. So I'm excited to make a bouquet with this one, and I'm hopeful that this columbine will spread and seed itself throughout the garden. This spilled wine Weigelia is another plant that's one of the few blooming in mid to late April for me here in my zone 7 in northwest Arkansas, where we get fairly mild winters, but we do definitely get cold and snow. We've had kind of a crazy spring this year, but I'm really enjoying the contrast of these blooms, especially when not a lot else is blooming so far. I have 3 of these dotted throughout the garden. And I really especially love, even when they're not blooming, the contrast between the foliage of just kind of true green natives and other annuals and perennials that I have against the backdrop of this spilled wine Weigelia. It just looks really nice to have different things for interest in the garden. It adds texture, it adds interest, it draws your eye, and it does kind of match with the mulch that I have going, just similar in tone. It's of course not the same color, but I am noticing that this plant is already putting on some good growth. I've had it for a year in the ground so far, so it's I planted it in October about a year and a half ago, so it's gone through 1 season and then been dormant 2 winters. So it's really looking nice and starting to fill out, and the hope is that this will reach its mature size of around 3 feet across here in the next couple of years. Though this Japanese maple doesn't have blooms, I could not leave it off of our list for things that look so incredible in the month of April. I love the way that these leaves are just such bright red, and they contrast really nicely with the other things I have in my garden. This is a year 2 Japanese maple that I got from, I believe, Sam's Club or Walmart, and planted it out last year. It's looking so nice, and I'm really excited to see it put on some growth. You'll notice that it's pretty close to the side of my house, but my goal is to keep it limbed up on that side and let it kind of sprawl toward my porch, and then out toward my garden as well. Hostas are one of the first things to break dormancy and to start growing lovely foliage in the spring. This variegated hosta with white on the edges is a prime example of that. I got this hosta from a friend as just a part of a tiny cutting, and it's only about a year and a half old in my garden. It of course was older when she took a cutting from the original plant, but it's looking so nice, and it complements the blooms that are in the garden so nicely. And I love how hostas just take up so much space so quickly in the garden. So they flesh out really quickly from winter, and they just add some nice bulk and weight in the garden, as some of the other perennials that I have are just waking up and just starting to leaf out. Lamb's ear are one of my favorite perennials, and for me, in my zone 6 to 7, depending on the year, they are evergreen as well. They look a little bit tattered in the winter, especially when it's super cold and windy, but lamb's ear rebound really quickly, and they look nice from the beginning of spring all the way through the summer. You'll notice that some of their leaves start to kind of die back as the summer is in full force, but you can just prune those off. And I really love the velvety texture that they add to the garden, and I like that from the very first crack of spring that they are in their full glory, looking really nice. This lamb's ear is actually a cutting that I took from a lamb's ear that I had probably 5 years ago in my old house, and I've just taken pieces of it with me that have lived in pots as I've changed locations throughout the years, and I've also been able to give some cuttings to my friends and family. So this is one of my favorites, and even though I don't really love the blooms of lamb's ear, I think that their foliage speaks for them and is enough for me in the border of my garden. The last thing that I had to feature is my peonies. These are just coming into bloom. This is my first bloom of the season, and these are second-year peonies that I got bare root. They had, I believe, 3 eyes on them, so I knew that they'd be small at first. Peonies are one that grows all the way new from the ground every single year, and they grow about 3 feet tall and wide and can just be completely loaded with these huge blooms. This bloom is about the size of my hand. It's just massive, and peonies come in all different colors. I have a variety of pinks and whites and creams, and I'm super excited for the rest of them to bloom this season.